Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be continuing work on the 1960 Bolens Ride-a-matic and specifically the Versa-matic drive system. Since the last video, we've done some cleaning up on this kind of Versa-matic pulley mechanism, and we've noticed a couple of things. Now, before we cleaned all of this up, this part here kind of acted as one. There was no movement in any of it, which we then realised that this should actually turn like this, which meant that we had to take off the E-clip, strip down all of the parts, which wasn't especially easy because they were seized, but we've cleaned it all up now, oiled it all up, and that moves as it should do, with the spring kind of resisting the movement that way. Something else we noticed though, if you look down the side there, is there's a little oiler hole. Yeah, there. Which clearly hasn't been used very much because it was seized, but there's no mention of that in the service manual, so we're not fully sure whether that was a standard thing or not. And it is kind of strange because if we look at the other side of this, there's two grease points there on the other mobile kind of area, which makes you think, why would they only put one oiling point rather than another grease nipple or another two grease nipples as there are on there. Now, the main reason for taking all of this off and cleaning it up was the fact that with this in the position where it was seized, which was about there, we couldn't actually get this pulley off because this was blocking it, but now we can just move it like that and we can take that pulley off and clean all of that up. Now, the first thing we're going to do today is take this Versa-matic pulley off, but this as it is isn't the most, or isn't the easiest thing to handle. So on our bench top here, we've opened up one of the holes. This is just a second-hand piece of board anyway, so it had a few holes that just needed enlarging. And if I take off the grub screw on there, take that off with the washer that goes with it, and those I can now go like that, and that kind of holds this whole thing in a manageable state so that we can just pull this off and it's easier to handle. We haven't taken one of these off before, so we're just going to do it slowly and bit by bit. So I use the impact driver to get this top nut off. There we are. Try and keep the parts roughly in order so that we know how to put this back together. Spring washer, normal washer, and a spacer. And I think, yeah, there we are. The rest of this pulley just comes off. I can see the two needle bearings, one in that side, one in this side. But with this off, that now gives us a chance to clean all of this up some more. We've cleaned up the shaft and the kind of brackets around it now. The shaft is marked, but it's not worn, so that is fine. And we've just put the spacers and washers and stuff back on there so that we don't lose anything. We also cleaned out the grease way with the airline and putting air through the top. Grease shot out of the other side and it kind of ended up on the wall, so we've had to clean that up a bit. But at least it's out of there now, and that is pretty much sorted. And we're going to turn our attention to this pulley now. So I'm going to use the impact driver here just to take off these three bolts. There's one. There's two. And and 3. Now, with those off, this part should, or this top pulley should, there we are, come off because that's just attached on there. The second pulley should slide off. There we are. And we will look at cleaning up the rest of it and taking apart possibly more if that's possible in a second off camera, because we need to be very careful with this bottom pulley because it's asbestos. We have all of the parts apart now and cleaned up nicely. It is actually the next day, and there's a reason for that, because we hit a bit of a snag, and that issue came with one of these bolts. You may notice that one of them is slightly shorter than the rest, which we noticed when we were taking those out. And there is a reason for that. If you look in this bolt hole, it is kind of sheared off in there. It's quite a way down though. So it's not like the bolt sheared at the surface or anything. It is completely to the bottom of that hole, which is kind of helpful and not helpful. It's not helpful because we spent the whole of whatever we had left of yesterday drilling that out and trying to use whatever easy outs and other techniques we could to try and pull that bit of the bolt out, and no drill or anything that we had could touch it. So in the end, we've had to resort to living with it being in there. So what we did was we took the sheared bolt and ground a bit off of the end, so that now, because there's still a decent amount of usable thread there, we can just wind this in and continue to use that bolt with the sheared part still in there. We had to grind that bit off the end so that when we do it up tightly, it doesn't hit the sheared part and then not hold these other discs tightly. Speaking of these other discs, we don't actually think this one is asbestos now. We think it might be some other form of, I don't know, composite or something. But we're still going to be careful with it because it could be brittle. And this plate here looks like it may or may not have been turned upside down, seeing as that's got original green paint there, and that is the side that we found like that. And obviously they can't paint that side if it's facing the disc, so we assume that that might have been turned around in the past. Now it is time for us to take this part and put the new bearings in there, which, speaking of the old bearings, these are made by a British company called Torrington, which I doubt are the originals, which suggests that this whole system has been apart before, which might be when that bolt cracked. But now we're going to take this part and get set up on the press. We're all set up on the press now, and we already had a piece of press tooling of the correct size, because I think we've used this size bearing before. But now we will get to pressing this in. There we are. We will just let this off and have a look at the results. There we are, that is one bearing in. Now to do the other side. Now dropping the second one in. It's going in just as smoothly as the first one. There we are, and take that out. That's the second bearing in. We've assembled the disc now, and we did this off camera because of the possible complications with that snapped bolt, but that's all together nicely. Now moving on to these bearings, obviously they're in there now, and something we always do to test these needle bearings once we've pressed them in is use a small screwdriver just to turn the needles, make sure it still works as it should do, which usually they're all fine. However, one of these was actually stuck, Now it wasn't much of an issue because just used a screwdriver and managed to unstuck it, and now they both turn nicely. Not sure whether that was just the press kind of squished it when we pushed it in there, but it's fine now, so we're not going to put too much thought into that. The other thing we do is we got a tap and used it to clean out all of the threads on this part and on these 4 threads here as well, just so that everything goes on smoothly. But now it's time to reassemble everything on this. So just got to try to line up all of these bolts, and I've got a socket and a small extension here just to help me out doing these up. Just going to put these in relatively loosely and we'll tighten them up afterwards. But cleaning up the threads helps a lot when it comes to this part, because if I didn't, these would all be relatively difficult to wind in, whereas as they are, I can just do these effectively finger tightness. There we are. Now if I hold this disc, we can turn it over. There we are, and put, that's unfortunate, and put this part back on. Again, I'll use the extension for the bolts and do these up, and then off camera we will just tighten it all up so it's ready to go back on this shaft. We've now put this pulley back together fully, so that would be ready to go back on. But before we do that, we're going to try and take apart these bits here to try and clean everything up and possibly put some new grease nipples on there. Now it's quite difficult to get to take all of this apart, but we can just get the impact driver on there. There we are. That's turned a bit, which is enough to loosen that off. And hopefully now there's a chance that we could possibly tap that pin out and separate all of these parts. The pin dropped straight out and we've cleaned up all of the parts here. We chose not to change the grease nipples in the end because these replacement ones that we've got, when we tightened them up, sat at an awkward angle, and since we'd rather not cut one of the threads down so that they face the right angle, we decided to use the old ones again, but we cleaned them up nicely and they worked anyway, so functionally that is all okay. Now we also put a new spring washer on the bolts. We had to take that fully out for that, but I can now slide these two parts together hopefully and try to line up hole for the pin. That looked lined up, but clearly it wasn't. Oh, there we are. It's nearly all the way through. I just need some persuasion to get the last bit. There we are. And that should be that there. So I now just need to tighten that bolt up while holding the pin in a relatively central position. We've now done up this bolt again, and this whole assembly is now all together again. So we are ready to move on to putting the pulley back onto this shaft. You may have noticed we've already put a new grease nipple on the end there. There's one spacer on there too. So now the next thing that goes on is the pulley itself. slides on nicely, turns nicely on those new bearings too. So we've just got to put each of these things back on. That's the spacer. We did actually have to make up a new washer there to take out some of the end float on this, reduce the unwanted movement. That washer goes on, spring washer, and the nut, which I think goes that way. Use a socket here. It's an interesting thing to try and tighten up. I'm not sure exactly where I'm meant to hold it from, to be honest. There we are, that feels nice and tight now. And that assembly is complete, pretty much. So if I just pull it out of here so you can see the whole thing still. That assembly is pretty much done when it comes to the work that we need to do on it. So once we've done the repairs to the Versa-matic lever, then this can all go onto the tractor. But that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.